And so I remember a student coming in. She came in, and I think her father was there. In my discussing how we needed to be inclusive, I mentioned Black, Asians, Hispanics, and I mentioned LGBT. Just we did. And I remember the father coming up afterwards, and he said,
Not all institutions, not all states are very much open and progressive. What would be your tips or suggestions in terms of how to best approach those, especially the negative feedback or the complete opposite of what we're trying to strive for?
Do you have like 6 hours to talk? The system, as it is designed, is meant to break.
Welcome to Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. Together, we'll uncover the power of purpose, experience mentorship magic, unpack ways to make a difference, and find transformative journeys as a community. Welcome to Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. This month, we're celebrating Pride and honoring the LGBTQ plus community's profound impact on society. Join us as we explore stories of courage, authenticity, trailblazing contributions, and how the community's involvement shapes a more inclusive world. Before we dive in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you're updated every time we have a new episode. Today, our very special guest is David Harris. A proud native of the Chicago area, was raised in the city's southern suburbs, and later earned his BS in Business Administration from the University of Illinois at Urbana. His academic journey continued with a fellowship in African American Studies Department at Syracuse University, culminating in an MA in International Relations with a focus on Latin America. Furthering his education, David pursued postgraduate studies in education at DePaul University. With 3 decades of teaching experience spanning public, charter, and private schools, David is a seasoned educator deeply committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. His contributions extend beyond the classroom, with active involvement in various education boards and committees, including the Independent Schools Association of the Central States Board of Trustees and its Equity Board. David is also the co-founder of Charlotte People of Color and Independent Schools, an organization dedicated to supporting faculty of color in private independent schools in Charlotte. Currently residing in North Carolina, David continues to inspire as a middle school history teacher, shaping young minds with his passion for learning and social justice. Please welcome to the pod, David Harris. Hi, David.
Hi, Joseph. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. I'm excited.
I'm sure that all our audience members will learn a lot from your very rich experience, especially for this month of Pride, that a lot of people would want to learn all the different facets of it. And I'm particularly very much interested with your stand on it as an educator. But before we dive into all those details, let's start with the first question that I ask all my guests. And that is, in your own words, what is your meaningful life story?
When I saw that, I was like, oh, that's hard, meaningful. I was trying to figure out exactly what I was going to say. So, as you said, I was born in Chicago. My mother and father had been married probably about 3 years. Harvey was the suburb that I grew up in. And my mother was a teacher. My father worked for I guess you would say, the public utility Commonwealth Edison. And I had a younger sister. In my house, there were books. There were always these books around. Early on, once I'd be able to read or whatever, I can remember picking up the book Before the Mayflower, which was by Lerone Bennett Jr. And it was a history of African Americans. And that's where I got my love and passion for history. I remember that book. I can still see it on the shelf. And I can remember reading it, doing history papers from the book and all of that. I grew up in a home where current events and politics and those things were discussed openly. So because I was born in that type of household, I just really had a passion for it. I just loved history. I just loved it. And went on to high school, Homewood Flossmoor High School in the southern suburbs, on to the University of Illinois, where I got a degree in business. That was something my father wanted me to do. Um, so, to make a long story short, how I got into teaching was working for Sears Roebuck in the Sears Tower at the time in Chicago, and it was unfulfilling. And this may sound cliche, but I wanted to have a career that I felt when they put me 6 feet under, I could say I had made an impact on them. And so I decided to be a teacher.
Let's dive into, the pivots that you had first, right? Because for sure, when you were younger, as you've described, your dreams and aspirations were kind of different to what led you to doing what you're doing today. When it comes to social justice, when it comes to equity and inclusion, that level of interest that you had when you were younger and eventually pursuing that now, was there a direct correlation or connection? Were you always interested when it comes to that angle? And what triggered that inspiration for you to become that person who will advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I would say my faith, my religion. I was raised Catholic, and people there can be many criticisms of the Roman Catholic Church, and I have a few of my own. But what I will say is that there is a strong emphasis on social justice, feeding the poor, helping those who are in need. And I can remember the campaign for human development. I had my little, I had a can that it was a Campbell soup can, and I had wrapped it with the logo, and I put the little top on it, and I went around the neighborhood and asking people to please give, right? And I can remember having conversations with my father about people who were poor, who didn't have as much as we did, and why that was. I can remember him telling or talking about that. So that was a profound influence. And as I said, Martin Luther King um, had a profound influence on me. If you read his work, and I'm not talking about just I Have a Dream, which a lot of people just that's all they know. But I would invite anybody to read his sermons, in which he, really kind of lays out what Christianity is in this church, in this country, versus the Christianity that really should exist. And so that had a profound influence on me. I will say, as I came of age in the 80s, and I'm dating myself, the liberation theology, which sweeps Latin America, captured my attention. Archbishop Oscar Romero is one of my heroes. This man who was a champion for those who were downtrodden and who, as you know, was killed while saying Mass one Sunday in the cathedral. All of those things had a profound influence, so it was just kind of natural, right, to see this world. And, the civil rights movement, and studying it and understanding how these individuals under the injustices before them, and that it was the church and through religion that they were going to be able to move forward and to change the world, right? King says on the night he becomes head of the Montgomery Improvement Association, in this great speech he gives, and he says to people in Holt Street Baptist Church, as only King can say, he said, "We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we're wrong," and then he concludes it because he says, if we're wrong, the Constitution is wrong. If we're wrong, then the courts are wrong. And then he ends it by saying, if we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong. And of course, we know God is not. So all of those things had a profound influence. Plus, growing up in a home where I think we had a real care for people who were less fortunate. We understood that. Now, I'm also, being, I think, African American, being from a group that has been oppressed, I saw that. I understood it. I read it. I knew what that was like. And what I tell people is what I always appreciate, those individuals who will stand up for those who are downtrodden. I've had people in my life who have not done that and those who have. So that would be primarily where it comes from. So a combination of the home I grew up reading, Dr. King, my religion, faith, and then what happens in the 80s.
Wow. I mean, I kept on nodding because I cannot help but relate as well, because very similar to, your intersectionality story wise. I was born and raised in the Philippines. I'm also Roman Catholic. Moving here in the US, feeling marginalized or othered sometimes, and also being part of the LGBTQ plus community. I am gay. So it's like all those layers, and always seeing that there's a wall, an invisible wall, despite the progress of where we are today in a current scenario. There's still some sort of an innate feeling that every day is a battle, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have to find ways to be an advocate for those who are just like you, being othered, being discriminated against. And to your point, using your very rich background, the values that you've formed from your household, from your beliefs, from your religion, from your reading, it's part and parcel of what you stand for and how you bring that into your everyday, and even when it comes to your profession. Now, touching upon as a history teacher, right? How do you practice, or how do you apply in your teaching building inclusive schools, or when it comes to history, and how that intersects with the concepts and principles of DEI, as well as the acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community in today's world?
That's a really good question and complex. I think, and I'm not going to give you like this piece of paper or thing that my lesson plan that I do. It doesn't work that way. It is just something that I bring into the classroom from the very beginning. I always have. So I'll give you an example. This was probably early in my teaching career. And so I remember a student coming in. She came in, and I think her father was there. They were both listening to me teach. And I just was teaching. But in my discussing how we needed to be inclusive, I mentioned Black, Asians, Hispanics, and I mentioned LGBT. Just really did. And I remember the father coming up afterwards, and he said, "Wow, never heard a teacher mention LGBTQ people in the classroom like this. Is there a way that I can make sure my daughter gets you next year?" And that is kind of how I do it, Joseph. It's like, this is part of, I want everybody when they come into the classroom to kind of understand we're going to talk about these issues very openly, and it's a very casual thing, right? So we're in my Socratic seminar. I do Socratic seminars in my global issues class. This past semester, a couple of kids wanted to do the issue with trans athletes, and another student wanted to do a Socratic seminar around the issues around bathroom use with trans individuals. And I'm like, okay, fine. I've made it clear to the parents that this class is an open class. Students can discuss whatever issues that they want to discuss, and we do that. In my other classes, there's been times when we do current events, and I always try to include some. Let's say we're doing, for example, let's say we're doing Southeast Asia, right, or East Asia. I might find articles around the LGBTQ community, and let's say Taiwan. What is the latest information? You can find that online, and you just include that in, right? But I oftentimes casually will mention it. We'll just be talking about it. I don't make this real big deal about it. I just want kids to know that we're going to talk about these issues very openly honest, and they can ask about them in any way, shape, or form that they want to. So that's been, I guess that's intentional, but that's not always the case for a lot of educators. They're uncomfortable with those issues. How do you handle a conversation around transgender athletes, right? You help guide students to ask questions to try to come to a deeper understanding of the topic, not necessarily change their mind about however way they're thinking. And then you always, from the very beginning, set a tone that the space is safe.
Mm-hmm.
That if I can model, if I can talk about it, I'm going to respect all the students, so do you. And it's worked out fairly well in the institutions that I've been in. So that's how I've kind of done it. Now, I have been lucky to be in institutions where the administration was not against those kinds of conversations, right? So in my global issues class, the administration fully understands what the class is about. I've told the parents what it's about, and we go for it. Granted, those conversations probably could not happen in a lot of schools, sadly, and we can get into that. But I've been lucky to do that, to be in these types of institutions. But even in these institutions, even those that are what progressive, we have our issues and we have pushback on those issues. My first time I had a student who was openly gay was probably about maybe 6 or 7 years ago at my last school in Chicago. There were a couple of students who were out and open and shared that information. So when a student does that, I always feel good. They must feel safe enough to be able to share that information.
I love the approach when it comes to being open about it, being matter of factly about it, and really just seeing and showing how the world works, because it's the reality of it right now, which I think is the real way. Like, I remember when I was a student, I learned more from real stories from my teachers as opposed to opening a textbook and memorizing the principles and theories in there, which I think is a really beautiful teachable moment, especially for sensitive topics or issues or themes like this. But to your point, not all institutions, not all states are very much open and progressive. Not all households, even in progressive states or cities, are as open as, everyone. Have you ever experienced those challenges? And for educators or for mentors, what would be your tips or suggestions in terms of how to best approach those, especially the negative feedback or the complete opposite of what we're trying to strive for?
Do you have like 6 hours to talk?
We'll
Because
try our very best. I know it's going to be a long conversation. It's going to be never ending.
in my 30 years, there's always pushback in some way, shape, or form. It can be exhausting. So I would tell anybody that is doing EIB work or DEI work, whichever the acronym we want to use, it is very, very challenging, sometimes thankless. If I had any hair, sometimes I would pull it out. It's all of those things. And I don't even know where to start, Joseph, because it's just part and parcel of the work. And that resistance, I want to tell you, can come from the dominant group, right? So if we're talking about LGBTQ, it can come from the dominant straight folk, and it can come from, believe it or not, it can come from members of the LGBTQ plus community, right? I've had that happen, right? I had a parent one time who was upset because they felt another teacher was pushing an agenda, and this person was gay. This father was gay, and really had a hard time, felt that the teacher was pushing an agenda. And I was like, wow, this is not what I felt was going to come from. I didn't think it would be. So there's all kinds of resistance. I can remember starting a faculty of color group at a school I was at. And I am telling you, you would have thought we were forming the Gestapo. I mean, just like, we're just going to do a people of color group. That's it, right? I can remember one person who actually evolved over time. I remember saying, what would you do if we had a group, meaning white people, and you couldn't come? It's like, can we have this conversation right here in this meeting? Do we have to? So it comes in so many forms. And, with LGBTQ plus issues, we run into age appropriateness, right? Is it appropriate we had a trans person speak at our school, who was an alum of the school? There was some pushback in the sense that some parents felt it was inappropriate for their sixth graders, because again, how do you talk about those issues, right? And so I think the challenge, or and I don't want to say challenge, what I have seen is if we can communicate as much with parents as possible, if we can kind of let them know that this is the stand of the institution, it can be very helpful. If you're in an environment, sometimes, Joseph, I think it's really important to understand the room that you're in, or in this case, the school that you're in. Really deeply understand what it is and how it's operating and what might be okay to push and what might not be. Now that takes skill and it takes time, and I've not always gotten it right. But you have to really kind of understand where you're at. So in my last school, I had a parent say, "Well, Mr. Harris, I'm happy that you pushed the envelope, right, for the kids. I really appreciate it." But I knew where I was. Would I push it as much here where I'm at now? Perhaps not quite the same way, but still going to push it. I think it's important to understand that being a teacher right now is not easy. You don't know what to say. How you're going to say it might be taken a different way. And a lot of this begins in COVID, right? When parents are kind of listening in on these conversations. Because before, I don't think it was quite as bad. But we're in a time where we're sometimes, particularly myself as a history teacher, on kind of pins and needles trying to, did I say this okay? The war in Gaza, for example, is another one. It can be really difficult. I just come into the classroom, do the best I can, mindful of the room, of the institution, and then move forward and let the chips fall where they may. It's good to have an administration that will back you and support you if something comes up or parent says something. But it is a constant in this day and age of the backlash. And I tell myself all this time, I had a guest on my own podcast, and she quoted Nina Simone, which was, "I'll tell you what freedom means to me. It means no fear." So I keep that in back of my mind. Yeah, how do I enter into these spaces, not being afraid when there is fear all around me? I'm going to tell you, there is fear everywhere. At schools right now, it really is.
I love how you put an emphasis on the communication to the parents, because ultimately, yes, there is a ruling in the institution, you are supported, but I think the clarity and, an open dialogue and them understanding what would be taught and the tonality and the overall atmosphere that will come out of the classroom is really very important, because it starts from being clear, being authentic, and being communicative, which basically is helpful when it comes to better understanding. But the other part that you've mentioned, which really struck me, was sometimes this vocation, and I would say that being an educator is a vocation, is sometimes thankless, because it's like, damn if you do, damn if you don't, but you're trying your very best to really give your best to give that education and to help the coming generations to be learned and to have that foolproof background so that they can become better individuals. My question now is, how do you keep that drive? How do you keep that passion? How do you keep that dedication for that mission that, going back to your 30s, you said that I will live a meaningful life if I pursue this path, despite the challenges that you're facing every single day, especially at this day and age that it became more complicated. What drives David to always wake up every single morning and say that I am an educator and I'll continue to do what I am doing?
Well, one thing is I will say that on my worst day, I don't mind going to work. So I have a passion for the job. I really enjoy it. So that's me going, because I do enjoy teaching. That doesn't mean that I don't get frustrated. And I think with the diversity work, it is so interesting because this year, this end of the semester, I stepped down from my role as our equity, inclusion, and belonging middle school coordinator. Now, has someone told me, David, you'll still be doing the work. You just won't have the title. And that's probably true, right? I've got some ideas and things I still want to float around. I just needed, for my own self-care, my own mental health or whatever, I needed to step back. I needed to give some time and to allow someone else to handle the role. Because if one is deeply, deeply passionate, cares a lot, and you're sometimes faced the backlash, and I'm going to tell you something, Joseph, it isn't backlash like sometimes you see on television, angry parents yelling at you. It can be some very, very subtle things. That here you are doing this work and people are putting up these roadblocks, right? And you're like, oh, what the heck is going on here? So it's like those microaggressions, right? That we talk about that build up over time. And so sometimes you got to step back for your own health. and to say, okay, I can't do much more than I can right now. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do the work. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be talking about it in my classroom. It doesn't mean if they call on me, David, we need you to help with such and such, that I won't do it. I probably will. But yes, I've had to. Yeah, this is the year you got me in an interesting moment in which I've actually stepped down from doing the work. They didn't want me to, but I felt I needed to for my own mental health. Because this is a hard time to do it, because it's not, it is one thing maybe 15 years ago, and I'm going to say let's say pre-Ferguson, but we could say pre-Trayvon Martin, and we get the rise of Black Lives Matter, that hashtag Me Too, and then we get what we see now with LGBTQ, the backlash and all that. So all of that, before that, it was hard work. But there was a belief, even as I was coming up and growing in my 20s and 30s, even 40s, that we were moving in a particular direction, Joseph, that our hard work was paying off, that advocacy in the classroom was going to pay off, that my students would go and change the world and make it better for all kinds of people, LGBTQ, Black, Asian, Hispanic. Now you wake up and you read the paper and you read of the countless anti-LGBTQ laws, anti-trans, banning of books. You're just going like, oh my God, what is happening? What is happening? So it's not only that you're doing the work in your said institution and whatever pushback you might get, and then it is the national and the international stuff that takes up a lot of time, right? That really, really tends to a lot. So, for me, when you do that kind of work, it's not just teaching. It is, for example, you might sponsor a club, a diversity club. I've done that. I've done Black Student Association. And I've do the, and advocating for students. That takes a lot, right? This year, Muslim students wanted a Muslim association after Gaza. I can help you. I'm not Muslim, but we got to get this. We got to get this off the ground. I got to meet with you. We got to have wider meetings so that this thing can happen for you. And you do it because you care, and because you want the world to be a better place, and you want the kids and the students to have an environment where they feel validated, right? And that takes a lot. I'm not gonna lie, and I hope people realize that those of us who do this work and are passionate and caring about it can take a lot.
I now really deeply understand what keeps you up at night and wakes you up in the morning feeling passionate, because you can advocate and you can support the students, especially those who are going through certain things that are related to the realities of the world today, with those specific examples that you've given. If there are other educators who are in the same situation but are feeling that level of stress, the pressure, the frustration, but they have that conviction, they have that mission, and they have that self imposed vocation that they will be there to advocate for the goodness of their students, if they are people of color, LGBTQ, other marginalized, what would be your thoughts for them, so that, similar to your situation right now, you can advocate for yourself, but you can also continuously advocate for your students and give what you can to support them in the current school setup and in the current system, the craziness that we are all living in?
I think one thing it's important to understand, and I have told people this: the system, as it is designed, is meant to break you. That's its whole purpose. That you will get tired and exhausted and throw up your hands and say, forget it. That's how it works. Change is slow. It is a process. There are many people who would like to believe, and you hear it all the time. I never will forget, I was in a meeting. You mentioned in my bio the equity board that I sat on when I was in Illinois. And one member of the board who was LGBTQ, who was white, and I say that so you understand the story. And there had been an issue that had come up, and he was a little bit frustrated. And he said, "Oh, just be glad when all these people, older people die off, and then younger people will be there, and it'll be okay." And I'm sitting there going, like, what? Does he really believe that? Now, there's that intersection, right? As an African American, a member of the community, LGBTQ community, I'm like, it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. And so if you're going to do this work, you need to understand that it is challenging, that it is difficult, that there are going to be roadblocks, that it can be rewarding at the same time. My reward comes from knowing that I created a space that was safe enough for students to be able to express themselves or to at least feel comfortable in this classroom. That's a reward. But that we're going to change these institutions. You're going to wake up one morning and LGBT flags flying over. There's some schools that do that. But wholesale, that's not going to happen. You need to understand that, right? You need to ground yourself in it and be realistic about what you actually can change. That does not mean that change cannot happen, because I believe it can. But that's what I tell people, that it is designed to break you. Sadly, I wish it wasn't, but that's how it is. It's not, you're not going to get a whole lot of rewards. I mean, let's just go back to 2020. Thousands of people in the street. I was thinking, wow, we're really going to go somewhere that's going to change. What? Here we are in 2024, and it's like, wow, where are we? And I will argue that, as we celebrate this Pride Month, and I believe in celebrating, I believe in doing whatever we need to do, because that is affirming, right? And that's another thing. Find your crew, find your people that are going to support you, then you can go out with, have a drink, hang out with. That's one of the reasons I helped start the Charlotte People of Color, was I build community with one another, right? Because the work is tough, and you need to have your crew to help you, to support you, to love on you, when a lot of times you're not going to get that love, right? So those are a couple of things that I really would give advice to people, to understand the system. And here's another one. Don't fall asleep. Now, they've made woke a bad word and all that, but you need to stay woke. Because I think sometimes, this is my own feeling, is that people got complacent. Women felt, oh, we've got Roe v. Wade, boom, okay, got gay marriage, everything's fine. Black folk are doing better. Look, we had a black president and all that. Don't fall asleep, because the issues that confront us for justice and social justice are still there.
I fully agree. One, we're in understanding the reality of the system. We might not like it, but that's the reality, and being aware about that reality keeps us grounded. Second is finding your tribe. I fully agree with you. We will thrive by finding our tribe and being there for each other. The third thing that you've mentioned about not being complacent, because definitely the work never stops. I mean, there is something new every single day. So therefore, it's a never-ending journey, which I think we all have to embrace if we are really dedicated to make every single day and every person a little better, and making the world better compared with how we saw it when we got here first. But going back to the meaning of Pride Month, and some schools really celebrating that in a big way, some not. If you would have your ideal scenario when it comes to how we can meaningfully celebrate Pride Month within schools or educational systems, how should that look like?
Well, in a perfect world, it would be deeply embedded into the curriculum. And if you're in a school like mine, which goes from basically, we'll say pre-kindergarten, we call it TK, through 12th grade, it would be woven throughout, right? That would be a perfect world. Now, that's a challenge, right? How do we get it interwoven? Who's comfortable teaching about it? How do we break it down? How do we celebrate it? Those are all challenges, and you have to, again, know the room and the audience and where you're at. There are schools I know in DC that, have a full-blown parade and do all of this kind of stuff. That's not going to happen in a lot of schools. But in a perfect world, it would be just general, right? We would be talking about these things very openly and very honestly within the curriculum.
Hopefully, I don't know, in the next generations, that ideal world can happen. I can only wish for that. But as you've mentioned, it's like bit by bit, every single day matters and work never stops. So we should continue, hopefully, chipping away and doing our part to make that eventually happen. So,
Right.
now on the lighter side of things, David, what is the meaning of Pride Month to you, and how significant is it to you? Do you celebrate it? Do you advocate for it? And why do you continue to do so if you do?
I'm a history teacher, so I'm always going to go back to the history of it,
Mm-hmm.
and how it starts. And Stonewall,
Mm-hmm.
black and brown drag queens, right? Who's saying, no, you're not raiding this place tonight, right? And there's a 3-day riot, right, as a result. And so that story alone is always empowering to me, right? It's not oftentimes told in the way that it should be, but for me, it is a time to relax and to be in community with those who are like you and who support you and who love you. Again, as a history teacher, I'm always thinking about those people who came before and also understand the moment that we're in now, which after June 30th, we still got to continue to do our work. So have your fun, get your flags out, put them out in front of your house and everything like that. And then as soon as it's over, get ready for the battle because we still got work to do.
Beautiful.
Still got work.
David, you've given me a different dimension now of what history or what a history teacher stands for. Because for me, remembering my school days where history is about the stories of the past, but hearing your story now, it challenges the history or the stories of the past to still be lived every single day at the present moment. And I think that's a beautiful definition, especially within the context of the history of pride and us within the LGBTQ plus community, because it's not just about the story of years ago, but making sure that we live that every single day and we remember that every single moment. I love your point about after June 30, what should we do? Because that's what truly matters so that we can be at the forefront of the change that we are really advocating for.
And I think, Joseph, it's really important for people to understand that it is not always protest, right? With the sign. To remind people that, you know, just loving one another and being open and honest about it and living out loud is a form of protest. And a lot of people think, you got to get your sign. Well, no, you don't have to. You don't necessarily have to kneel for the anthem. You could, and then I have nothing wrong with that. But there are many, many ways in which we in the LGBT community can stand up, and one of them is living our lives authentically.
That's great to hear, and I fully agree. I will now ask you the same last question that I ask all my guests. We started with you telling me the story of your meaningful past. Now I'd want to hear your take on what is a meaningful life to you, and how do you keep living that every single day?
That's a powerful question at this particular stage in my life. When my father died in 2021, I can remember, and it was still during COVID, so we did have a funeral. Family were able to come, but we couldn't really gather after. I can remember my grandson, he was running around the house, a year and a half. And I'm thinking, oh, you're the patriarch of the family now. You're up next. Right? And it may sound morbid, but I was thinking that, right? Because I had seen my grandmothers bury their mothers. I had seen my parents bury my grandparents. And now I had buried my father. And so I was struggling with this real sense of mortality. And one of the things I realized through therapy, my therapist was like, okay, you're going to die. What do you want your legacy to be?
Mm.
And that has kind of driven me. What do I want to leave behind my grandchildren? What do I want? What do I want my legacy to be? And so for me, meaningful life, and I told my students this 5 years ago when I spoke at their graduation day, when I turned 50, All my family and some close friends came to our home. And my cousin said, David, you're the only one in the family when you have something like this and everyone comes. And that has stuck with me. That you touch people, you love them in a way, and they return that love back for you. And that is meaning for me. It is that you touch people, that you love them, and they understand the type of person that you were, that you cared and you loved them back.
That is very inspiring and empowering and humbling. Thank you so much, David, for sharing that piece that I'm sure a lot of folks who listen to this conversation will have those amazing takeaways, because for sure, all of us at the end of the day would just want to have that beautiful legacy and meaningful life. Now, I'd want to give you the floor. If there are folks who would want to reach out to you, how can they best reach out to you?
The best way is, as you know, I have a podcast called The Teachers Forum. So you can reach me at david@theteachersforum.org. Or you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David, again, for unselfishly sharing your wisdom and your time. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you. And most importantly, happy Pride.
Happy Pride, and thank you, Joseph, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It has been an honor.